Hello, Heebie Jeepsters. Welcome back to another episode of Heebie Jeebies TV. Today's episode is going to be another crime mystery. It is a very unfortunate circumstance because it does revolve around an entire family and a massacre that occurred with this family. So if you are sensitive to these topics and any type of crime that is made against children, we're going to have to ask you to please click out and join us for the next episode. This story takes us back to 1922 in Germany, specifically to a small town called Weidhofen. I'm sorry for my botching pronunciation, but yes, it takes place in that small town, which is just north of Munich. And it actually revolves around, as I said previously, an entire family. And they lived on a rural farm. So the people who were involved were 6 individuals. It involves a elderly couple, Andreas and Casilia. They who have a daughter named Victoria, and Victoria, who actually also has 2 children of her own, Casilia, named after her mother, and Joseph, her newborn baby son. And they all lived in the home along with a live-in maid. Okay, so a lot of weird things started happening in this home, specifically revolving around the maid initially. So around 6 months before the massacre occurred at the home, the maid just suddenly quit. And she said it was because she might have thought the house might have been haunted and that she heard strange noises and just had eerie feelings within the home, but specifically hearing a lot of noises coming from the attic. And the family didn't seem to pay too much attention to her concerns, so she just felt unsafe there and decided to leave. Then there came a new maid who was actually a part of the massacre as well. So some of the events that took place leading up to the final moments of the family were a little bit bizarre. So first off, Andreas, who is the head of the family, the father, the grandfather of the children, he said that one day he was just going around the house looking to see what needed to be done. And then out of nowhere, he found a newspaper just sitting out on his porch, which he had not bought. And for those of you that don't know, back in the day, you had to buy or subscribe to the newspaper to be delivered to your home. So he went to go ask his family if any of them had bought it or if they knew anything about it, and none of them said yes. So he kind of just brushed it off and said, oh, maybe, you know what, the mailman dropped it on our lawn and it was just an accident. It was a one-off thing. So he brushed it off. The next occurrence happened with Andreas also, and this was actually a few days before the massacre occurred. And he said that, and it was March, keep in mind. He said that there was still snow around the house on his property, and that he saw some footprints of shoes in the snow that led from the house all the way to a room on his property, which was leading to a machine room next to his farm. So the night of the attack, they suspect that the attack took place on March 31st. And what happened that day? So the day started off with the new maid that the family had hired because the previous one had left suddenly. She arrived in the morning with her sister who dropped her off. And the sister also stayed for a little bit and she got to know the family, but she didn't stay for very long. And they actually suspect that she might have been the last people to see the entire family alive, including her sister. So afterwards, the next day, nobody really knew what had happened to the family at that point. But the next day, people started to get a little bit suspicious because things that occurred weren't the norm. So there were 2 workers who came to the house from time to time to collect coffee orders from the family, as they usually do. So these 2 men, they went there, and normally they don't have any problems interacting with the family, and the family is always at home. And to their surprise, nobody answered the door. They stayed a few minutes, walked around a little bit to see if they could see anything, but no one was there, so then they left. But what was weird, though, is that they did notice that the farm doors were open just before leaving, which isn't really the case when they go there, especially if nobody's at home. So they found it a little bit suspicious, but again, they kind of it was a one-off and they left. Other individuals started to grow suspicious as well of the family having disappeared or that something might have happened because afterwards, the church that was in the town, Victoria was actually a member of the choir, and they noticed that she hadn't been coming to the practices for the choir. So they thought that was suspicious as well, given that there was no notice either. And then also Victoria's daughter, Kazilia, she was also noted to be missing from school, which was also suspicious because she had a regular attendance with no issues. So little things here and there. So a few days later, April 4th, remember, they think that the incident took place March 31st. So it's almost getting to 5 days now, right? This man who was actually hired by the family to fix the family's food chopper, he had arrived to do his job. But when he got there, same thing like the men who were there to take the coffee orders. He knocked on the door, no answer. Thought it was very bizarre because he has had work for this family done before. But given the circumstances, he said he didn't want to just leave, having gone there and taken the time to make the trip out there. So he stayed and he ended up fixing the food chopper, and it actually took him about 4.5 hours. And throughout that entire time, nobody arrived at the home. Nobody even came out to see if he needed anything or if everything was going well. Again, he thought it was really bizarre. He tried again to see if anybody was at home. No one was there, so then he left. Later that day, the same day, April 4th, a man, a family friend of the family, Lorenz, he started to grow increasingly worried at the fact that it had been several days since anybody in the area had heard from the family. So what he did was he sent one of his sons down to go check on the family to see if they were okay or if they were home. The son goes, he knocks on the door, same thing as everybody else, nobody answers. So the son then leaves and he goes back home to tell his father what happened. So Lorenz, again, given that he was a family friend and that his sons had no luck finding the family, you know what, he decided to go himself and investigate, because this is very, very bizarre behavior for the family. So he ends up going, and it wasn't until Lorenz gets there that he decides to investigate further or to pry a little bit further. And again, it wasn't until this day that the bodies were actually found. So Lorenz, unfortunately, found bodies in the farm first. In the farm, he ended up finding 4 of the individuals from the home. So he found the elderly couple, Andreas and Kazilia, and then he found their daughter, Victoria, and they also found Victoria's daughter, Kazilia, as well. And then within the home, they ended up finding Joseph, which is Victoria's baby boy, and the maid Maria, again, inside the home. So very, very tragic circumstances. And again, very bizarre, because to this day, nobody really knows who it was. But there are a lot of theories or things that people believe may have happened at the night of the murder. But again, nothing is concrete. Okay, so what happened? What did they find in the investigation? Again, as I mentioned before, they believe that the murder happened on March 31st because of when backtracking the incidents of individuals coming to the home, nobody hearing from them. They suspected that, okay, you know what? It happened March 31st. So what they think happened was that each of the family members were lured into the farmhouse. So pretty much they think that the individual who had murdered them hid in there and attracted each family member slowly by the noises that they had heard on the previous night. So screaming, random creaks here and there, footsteps. So they think that this is what the killer or killers had used to get each of them to go to the farmhouse one by one. And then they were struck in the back of the head with a farm tool called a mattock. It pretty much looks like an axe, or very similar to an axe. And so yes, they think that the killer hit them at the back of the head, and then that's where they pretty much were bludgeoned to death. And then they think that after that, after the main individuals had deceased, the murderer ended up making their way into the home, where they then disgustingly and unfortunately murdered the baby boy in his crib. And then they went after the maid who was sleeping in her room. So the police officers and investigators were actually very surprised and taken aback as to how many people arrived at the home or on the property, and nobody noticed like a stench or an odor, or no one was gravely suspicious about the fact that this family pretty much just went completely silent for several days. But nevertheless, they continued their investigation, and there was a high likeliness that the granddaughter, Kazilia, she had actually been alive for several hours after being hit over the head, because They said that they found her hair in her hand. So they think that maybe after she had gotten hit, she was touching it and like hair had fallen out of her hand. And they also saw a lot of blood around her and within her arm's reach. So I think that maybe she might have been very confused and dazed after getting hit over the head. So they think it might have taken several hours for her to then bleed out, unfortunately. So after that, they ended up going into the home to further investigate what might have occurred. So they think that this killer had made themselves comfortable in the home, apparently. For some reason, this seems to be a popular occurrence with murderers who massacre families, because we had done another video on a Japanese family who also was completely massacred, and the killer made themselves welcome in the home by going throughout the house, finding what they liked, what they didn't like, eating, etc., etc. So very similar thing happened here. The killer decided to look throughout the home to see what was good, what was not good. They ended up eating all the bread in the home, apparently, taking some meat from the pantry, and then even feeding the farm animals. I mean, it's nice that obviously farm animals were fed, but it's very bizarre. Why are you just acting like you didn't just murder an entire family? So as they continued their investigation, they ended up also receiving reports from individuals within the area that they actually saw fire or smoke coming out of the fireplace of the house and the chimney. So definitely somebody was within the home. And that's probably one of the reasons why people were suspicious, but they weren't too worried, because you know what, there's activity within the home. The chimney has smoke coming out of it. Okay, maybe they're in there and they just don't want to come out. So given that they suspect that they were murdered March 31st, who was in the home for this period of time? Most likely the killer, right? So again, they kept investigating the remainder of the home, and they made their way up into the attic. And in the attic, bizarre enough, they found a bunch of food scraps, a bunch of trash everywhere, and they also found some tiles that had been removed within the attic that allowed for visibility into the remainder of the home. So what they ended up suspecting was that somebody was actually living in the attic of this family unnoticed for who knows how long. And they had made themselves comfortable enough and were watching the family, monitoring them, I guess, for this plan. I don't know. Very, very weird. After finding this evidence, they ended up suspecting about 100 different people, but they weren't ever able to really narrow it down to one person, and nobody was ever arrested. Who could have done this? Who, what, where, when, why, how? There are a few theories, 3 more popular ones. The first one that is out there is Victoria's husband, Carl. So this one, I guess, kind of made sense, but it was more so he said, she said type of situation. So Victoria's husband, Carl, was actually at war, and he was pronounced KIA. And what was weird, though, was that they had never found his body, or his body was never returned to the homeland. So they suspect that it might have been him, because there were rumors that Joseph, Victoria's son, the newborn son, was actually from an incestuous relationship between Victoria and her father, Andreas. So they're suspecting that Carl found out about this, and then to get back or to avenge or revenge, whatever, he went and killed Andreas first, and then the rest of the family in his rage. But this was then later debunked, because after interviewing several members around the circle that Carl had, they said that other fellow soldiers did see his body and that he did pass away at war. So that has been ruled out. Second suspect, or second theory, I should say. People believe that it actually might have been Lorenz, the neighbor who sent his son to go check up on the family, and then who then went himself to go investigate and check in on the family because he was worried. So the reason why they think that it might have been Lorenz was because there were a lot of rumors going around that Lorenz was actually the father of Joseph. And that the reason why he wasn't involved with Victoria was because Andreas, Victoria's father, did not approve of the relationship and did everything to stop it. So they believe that in in revenge, Lorenz had gone and murdered the father first and then the entire family. And they also, the police and the investigators, they actually made Lorenz a suspect immediately after he discovered the bodies because, just in the process of everything, you have to rule out everyone. And they found that he behaved kind of strangely when he did discover the bodies and the interactions that he had with the investigators afterwards. They thought that he wasn't grieving enough, like he was just responding very subtly, not in a way that someone would react if individuals that were very close to them would have been murdered and that they found them. But then they later ruled that out as shock, so that was kind of a little bit on the down low. But there's more. So on top of that, they realized that Lorenz had a key to the house and that he was able to unlock the door, whereas other people who had come to visit the home, they weren't able to do that and everything was locked, besides the farmhouse doors that the two coffee ordering men saw. So, and on top of that, given the fact that Lorenz had a key, family members and friends of the family members had actually all been talking about and had reporting that there was a family key to the home missing and that nobody had ever found it. And then afterwards, they also found it very interesting with the fact that Victoria had actually asked Lorenz to pay for child support a few months before the murders. And when Lorenz was questioned by the investigators when they arrived, why were you in the home? He was like, I was here to see my son. So maybe in his shock or daze or whatever, he revealed that secret, or was he just so confused? I don't know, but he definitely seems more likely to be a suspect in my eyes, at least. And then lastly, there is a police academy in Germany who actually took up this cold case because they wanted to do further investigations. And given the fact that this was brought up again in 2007, there was a lot more technology, a lot more things that allowed for further investigation to occur in cold cases. So this academy, I'm going to botch the pronunciation, but I'm going to try to read what it's called. So the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy. So again, using the newfound technology that we have nowadays, well, this was about 16 years ago. But anyways, you know what I mean. So with this newfound technology, they ended up actually narrowing it down to one person who they're very, very sure was the murderer of this family. But because they are in an academy and because they ended up figuring out that this individual is already deceased, they wanted to keep the results that they found from their investigation private because they wanted to reserve the rights and privacy of the family and the individual who is now deceased, because nothing else can be done. The whole family is gone. And then on top of that, a year after, they actually they actually tore down the entire family home and the farmhouse, and they made a memorial out of it. So they just wanted to keep the peace in that sense. I feel like any remaining family members or friends of the families would have wanted to know, but, I guess to each their own, and the police academy thought that this was the best route to keep it silent. But they did reveal some information. The only thing that they did say, though, was that the individual who killed them was actually a family friend, and that it was definitely a crime of passion. So, given the history and information about Lorenz, maybe it was Lorenz. Crime of passion. You have a son that you're not really allowed to see, or that you're not really allowed to spend time with. A father-in-law, well, not really father-in-law, but the father of your baby mama doesn't want you to see them and does not approve of your relationship. There's going to be a lot of turmoil there, so yes, at the end of the day, it is a very sad circumstance. It's a massacre, and children had to die because of someone's anger. So stay tuned for the next episode. Let us know if you like this episode or not. Comment, like, subscribe. Bye, Heebie Jeepsters.